night of shadows. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the Thornwood estate. Inside, the grand old house stood silent, the only sound being the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. In the master bedroom, Lily Thornwood lay peacefully asleep, her auburn hair spread across the pillow like a fiery halo. The soft rise and fall of her chest was the only indication of life in the stillness of the night. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. Shadows danced in the moonlight, moving almost with a will of their own. From these shadows emerged a figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. The vampire moved with a predatory grace, its movements silent and fluid. It approached the house, gliding over the manicured lawn, and paused at the large bay window of the bedroom. With a subtle flick of its wrist, the latch on the window gave way. The vampire slipped inside, a phantom in the night. It stood at the foot of Lily's bed, watching her with a hunger that had been festering for centuries. She stirred slightly, as if sensing the malevolent presence, but remained in the grip of sleep. The vampire moved closer, its eyes never leaving her face. It bent down, inhaling her scent, savoring the purity of her blood. Then, with a quick, almost tender motion, it brushed her hair aside and sank its fangs into the soft flesh of her neck. Lily's eyes flew open, but no scream escaped her lips. She was paralyzed, held captive by the vampire's unholy power. The room grew colder as the vampire fed, drawing the very life essence from her. Her skin grew pale, her body limp, as the creature drained her like a parasite, a leech on her vitality. The vampire's eyes fluttered shut in ecstasy, a satisfied smile spreading across its lips. It reveled in the taste of her blood, the warmth of her life force. When it was sated, it licked its lips and stepped back, leaving Lily a lifeless husk, her once vibrant eyes now dull and vacant. The vampire lingered for a moment, admiring its handiwork, before slipping back into the shadows from whence it came. As it vanished into the night, the grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing ominously through the silent house. Edgar Thornwood walked briskly through the dimly lit streets, his mind preoccupied with the latest findings in his laboratory. An expert on diseases, Edgar often lost track of time when he was engrossed in his work. Tonight had been no different, and it was well past midnight when he finally headed home. He turned the corner onto his street, his thoughts still on his research, when he noticed something amiss. The front door of his house was ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. Edgar's heart skipped a beat. Lily never left the door open, especially not at this hour. He quickened his pace, a sense of dread settling in the pit of his stomach. Pushing the door open, Edgar stepped inside, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Lily," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. There was no response. The house felt different, colder somehow. Edgar hurried up the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When he reached the bedroom, he stopped dead in his tracks. The sight that greeted him was something out of his worst nightmares. Lily lay on the bed, motionless, her skin deathly pale. Edgar rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he touched her cold cheek. "No, no, no," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. He frantically checked for a pulse, but there was none. Lily was gone. As the reality of the situation sank in, Edgar's grief was replaced by a cold, burning rage. He noticed the puncture wounds on her neck, the telltale signs of a vampire's attack. The world around him seemed to blur, his mind consumed by thoughts of vengeance. The creature that did this would pay dearly. In that moment, Edgar Thornwood, a man of science, made a vow. He would hunt down the monster that took her from him. The night was no longer just a time of rest. It was a battleground, and Edgar was ready for war. The haze of grief. The days that followed Lily's death were a blur for Edgar Thornwood. The world around him seemed to move in slow motion, each moment suffused with a dull, throbbing ache. His mind was lost in a haze of pain, guilt, and grief. Arrangements were made. People came and went, but none of it registered. He moved through the motions, his heart numb, his thoughts consumed by the loss of his beloved wife. The funeral came and went, a somber affair, attended by friends and colleagues. They offered their condolences, but their words felt empty, meaningless. Edgar stood by Lily's grave, staring blankly at the headstone, unable to process the finality of it all. Weeks passed in this state, the days blending into one another, until one evening, something shifted. It was a rainy night when Edgar finally emerged from his stupor. He stood in his study, staring at a photograph of Lily, when a sudden clarity pierced the fog of his mind. He couldn't let her death be in vain. He had to do something. With renewed purpose, he raced to his laboratory, driven by a desperate need to bring her back. Edgar's laboratory was a testament to his expertise in diseases. Shelves lined with books on pathology, microscopes, and petri dishes filled the room. He was used to studying live cells, understanding how they were infected and how they could be cured. But now, he was venturing into uncharted territory. He began testing on dead cells, trying to reanimate tissue, to breathe life back into what had been lost. Day after day, night after night, Edgar worked tirelessly. He performed experiment after experiment, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He injected cells with various chemicals, subjected tissues to electrical currents, but each attempt ended in failure. The dead remained dead, and with each failure, his hope waned. Weeks turned into months, and Edgar found himself on the brink of despair. He was close to giving up, the weight of his grief threatening to crush him. Then, one evening, the phone rang, jolting him from his desolation. "Hello," Edgar answered, his voice hoarse. "Dr. Thornwood," a voice replied. "My name is Jonathan. I heard about your wife. I'm so sorry for your loss. I too have suffered at the hands of vampires. There are others like us. We've formed a group to console each other. Would you like to join us?" Edgar hesitated, then agreed. He didn't want consolation. He wanted answers. But perhaps this group would provide a lead. The meeting was held in a dimly lit basement of an old building. Edgar entered to find a handful of people seated in a circle, their faces etched with sorrow. They shared their stories, voices trembling as they recounted their encounters with the undead. Edgar listened impatiently, waiting for his turn. When he finally stood, his voice was cold and determined. "I just want to know how to find them and kill them," he said. His words were met with shocked silence. The other attendees exchanged worried glances, but no one spoke up. The meeting ended soon after, and Edgar left, his frustration mounting. As he stepped outside, a strange man approached him. "So, you want to kill them?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Edgar turned to face him. "Yes," he replied, his eyes burning with resolve. The man nodded. "You know, it's not like all the movies and stories. They're pretty much unkillable by us humans, but there are ways they can die." Intrigued, Edgar pressed, "And you know how?" "Not me," the man said, "but I do know someone." Edgar followed the man through the dark, eerie streets, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They walked for hours, the cityscape growing more foreboding with each step. Finally, they stopped in front of an old, decrepit building. "In there," the man said, nodding towards the entrance. Edgar looked at the building, then turned to thank the man, but he had already disappeared into the shadows. Steeling himself, Edgar stepped inside, determined to find the answers he sought and exact his revenge. The bargain. As Edgar entered the decrepit building, the air grew thick with the scent of mold and decay. The darkness pressed in on him from all sides, and he groped his way forward through the labyrinthine corridors. Faint whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, taunting him, but he pressed on, driven by a desperate need for answers. He saw a faint light up ahead, and quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. The light led him to a small room, dimly illuminated by flickering candles. In the center of the room sat a strange man, his features obscured by shadows. Before him was a large cauldron, filled with a bubbling, iridescent liquid. "Welcome, Edgar," the man said, his voice smooth and eerily calm. Edgar stopped in his tracks. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" The man smiled, a cold, unsettling expression. "I am but a messenger, here to offer you a bargain from my lord." "A bargain?" Edgar repeated, suspicion lacing his voice. The man nodded. "You wish retribution. You wish power. My lord can give you all these things and more." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Edgar's. "You wish to kill those who walk in shadow. My lord can grant you this power, the power over death itself. But know this, you must not use this power to bring back your loved one from the dead." Edgar felt a yearning deep within him, a desperate hunger for the power to avenge Lily. "And what do you want in return for such power, if it even exists?" he asked, his skepticism apparent. The strange man chuckled softly. "I want nothing, but my lord will require your service. Once you die, you will become the property and servant of our lord Necros. You will serve him as an undead slave for eternity." Edgar, a man of science, scoffed at the notion. "All right, I'll bite. I agree then. I accept the power and your lord's terms." The man smiled again, more broadly this time. "He will be pleased. Now, as your kind do not understand delayed gratification and expect everything immediately, we will take a part payment now for this power. You are a scientist, yes? You work with your hands." "Yes," Edgar replied. "I manipulate intricate experiments and need steady hands." "Good," the man said, picking up a dead rat and throwing it into the cauldron. The liquid bubbled violently, and the rat's skin melted away in the acid. The strange man looked at Edgar. "Put your hands in the acid." Edgar stared at him in disbelief. "Is this a joke? I will not do this." The man remained calm. "Do you think your dead wife would do it for a second chance at life? Do you not want to avenge her as much as you say?" Edgar's eyes darkened with anger and resolve. Without another word, he thrust both his hands into the cauldron. The liquid bubbled and hissed, but his hands remained untouched, unscathed. He pulled them out, staring at them in confusion. The man spoke again, his voice carrying an ominous weight. "Your payment has started." Suddenly, Edgar felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The room spun, and he collapsed to the floor, his vision fading to black as the strange man's voice echoed in his mind. "Welcome to your new beginning, Edgar Thornwood." Edgar awoke the next morning in a small, decrepit room. The candles had long since burned out, leaving him in near darkness. He looked around, his mind foggy with confusion. The strange man and the cauldron were gone as if they had never been there. For a moment, he doubted the events of the previous night, wondering if it had all been a dream. Rising to his feet, Edgar made his way out of the building and into the grey morning light. As he walked through the streets, he felt a strange sensation. When he looked at people passing by, he could sense their life force, an almost tangible aura that seemed to tell him how much time they had left. It was disconcerting and intriguing all at once. Arriving at his home, Edgar noticed a dead bird lying on the pavement. A peculiar energy emanated from it, drawing his focus. He concentrated, feeling a surge of power within him. The bird began to twitch, then flapped its wings and rose into the air, only to fall lifeless again a moment later. Edgar stared at it, astonished. Could he really have the power to bring the dead back to life? With renewed urgency, Edgar jumped into his car, a sleek 1968 Pontiac GTO, and sped towards his laboratory. His mind raced with possibilities, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through him. Arriving at the lab, he wasted no time. He set up his experiments, but this time, instead of relying on his scientific expertise, he focused on the strange new energy within him. Edgar took a deep breath and placed his hands over the dead tissue samples. He concentrated, feeling a strange sensation of transference, as if a small piece of his life force was flowing into the tissue. The samples twitched, then moved, coming to life under his command. He watched in awe as the once dead cells responded to his will. Hours passed in a blur of experimentation and discovery. Edgar pushed himself to the limits of his newfound abilities, bringing small animals and tissue samples to life, only to watch them return to death once he withdrew his focus. By the time he left the lab, he was exhausted, both physically and mentally. Returning home, Edgar collapsed into bed, his body heavy with fatigue. His mind, however, was a whirl of thoughts and emotions. As he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of a dark, moonlit graveyard. He and Lily stood among the tombstones, both of them pale and cold, undead creatures bound together in eternal matrimony. They exchanged vows, promising to stay together forever, even in death. The dream was both beautiful and haunting, filling Edgar with a mixture of sorrow and determination. When he awoke the next morning, the memory of the dream lingered. It fueled his resolve to continue his quest, to master the power he had been given, and to exact his revenge on the vampires who had taken Lily from him. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Edgar Thornwood was no longer the man he once was. He had become something else, something stronger, and he would not rest until he had achieved his goal. The words of the strange man lingered in Edgar's mind, a constant reminder of the warning he had received. Do not raise your loved one from the dead. But Edgar had other plans. As night fell, he prepared himself for what he knew was a forbidden act. Clad in dark clothing, he made his way to the cemetery where Lily was buried, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The cemetery was shrouded in darkness, the moon casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. Edgar stood over Lily's grave, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He held out his hands, feeling the strange power within him surge. Concentrating, he sent his life force into the ground, willing Lily to rise. Moments later, he heard a faint clawing sound from beneath the earth. His heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. He fell to his knees and began to dig frantically, the soil giving way beneath his hands. His fingers scraped against wood, and with trembling hands, he pried open the coffin. Out burst Lily, her movements jerky and unnatural. Edgar staggered back, horrified by the sight before him. Her once beautiful face was now thin and skeletal, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Her body moved with an eerie stiffness, devoid of the grace she once possessed. She stood before him, her mouth hanging open, emitting a low, guttural moan. "Lily," Edgar whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He reached out to her, but the woman he loved was gone. In her place was a hollow shell, an automaton waiting for his command. Her personality, her warmth, her essence, all of it had been stripped away. He held her, tears streaming down his face as he gazed into her empty eyes. The pain of seeing her like this was too much to bear. He had hoped to bring her back, to restore her to the woman she once was, but he had created a monster instead. Despair overwhelmed him, and he realized he had to undo what he had done. "Lily," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I am so sorry." He commanded her back into the coffin, her movements mechanical and devoid of resistance. Holding out his hands once more, he concentrated on withdrawing the power he had given her. The energy flowed back into him, and Lily's body went limp, returning to a lifeless corpse. Edgar buried her again, the soil falling like heavy stones on his heart. As he stood over her grave for the second time, the weight of his actions pressed down on him. The pain was unbearable, his heart filled with a searing agony and an unquenchable hatred. He had hoped to defy death, to reclaim what had been taken from him, but he had only succeeded in deepening his own suffering. Edgar clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. The vampires who had brought him to this point, who had taken Lily from him, would pay dearly. He would make them suffer for what they had done, for the torment they had inflicted upon him. With a heart filled with pain and hate, he vowed to hunt them down and destroy them, no matter the cost. A visit from family. Weeks passed in a blur, and no one heard from Edgar Thornwood. His friends and colleagues were concerned, but it was his sister, Margaret, who decided to take action. She bundled up her newborn son, Stephen Lestat, and made her way to Edgar's home, hoping to check on her reclusive brother. When she arrived, she knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She called through the letterbox, her voice echoing in the silent house. "Edgar, it's Margaret. Please open up." Again, there was no response. Just as she was about to leave, the door flew open, and there stood Edgar. Margaret gasped. Edgar's face was pale as death, his features gaunt and aged. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks, his eyes hollow and haunted. "My goodness, Edgar, what have you been doing? You look terrible," Margaret exclaimed, pushing past him into the house. She hurried inside, her maternal instincts kicking in to aid her brother. "I even brought little Stephen here to cheer you up." As Margaret busied herself in the kitchen, making up some food for Edgar, she kept talking, trying to fill the oppressive silence. "Everyone's been so worried about you. We miss you, Edgar. I know losing Lily has been hard, but you can't shut yourself away like this." Edgar watched her, barely registering her words. His eyes were drawn to the small child she had placed in a carrier on the kitchen table. Stephen Lestat, his nephew, was a beautiful baby with wide, curious eyes and a healthy, vibrant aura. Edgar could feel the life force emanating from the child, strong and vibrant. Unable to resist, he reached out and touched Stephen's head. A strange connection formed between them, something profound and ancient. Edgar felt a rush of sensations, memories not his own, whispers of power, and a sense of protection that seemed to envelop the child. He sensed Necros' presence, a dark yet protective force around Stephen. This child was special in some way that Edgar couldn't quite grasp. Margaret returned to the kitchen, still talking. "We've all been so worried about you. You need to take care of yourself, Edgar. Lily wouldn't want you to waste away like this." She continued fussing over him, trying to coax him into eating something, but Edgar did not reply. The connection with Stephen had left him overwhelmed. The touch had transferred something from Edgar to the child, a piece of his life force, or perhaps something darker. He felt weak, as if drained by the encounter. After a while, Margaret gathered her things. "I'll come back and check on you soon," she said, giving him a worried look. "Take care of yourself, Edgar." As she left, Edgar stood motionless in the quiet house, the temporary daze enveloping him. The touch with his nephew had left him feeling strange and disoriented. Whatever had passed between them, it had weakened him. He felt a new emptiness inside, as if a part of him had been siphoned away, leaving him more determined, yet vulnerable. The presence of Necros' protection around Stephen left Edgar with a chilling realization. This child was destined for something extraordinary, something tied to the dark powers he had only begun to understand. More time passed, and Edgar spent his days and nights honing his newfound skills. His powers had grown beyond merely raising the dead. He had learned to manipulate blood and tissue, forming sharp, stabbing objects from his own blood, a kind of blood spear. Not only could he give life, but he could also take it, his yard littered with dead birds, from which he siphoned their essence of life to enhance his power. He was becoming a necromancer, driven by his need for vengeance. He roamed the streets at night, using his heightened senses to detect strange life forms and auras. One evening, he noticed a peculiar essence, an aura that seemed to dart between the shadows. Locking onto it, he followed it to an old abandoned house. The strange aura moved inside and disappeared. Edgar stood outside, whispering to himself, "Got you." He waited for the following night, summoning corpses from the nearby cemetery and laying in wait inside the old house. As the night wore on, he felt it. The aura was returning. He felt it enter the home and hid in the shadows. A voice echoed through the darkness. "I know you are in here. Come to kill the unkillable." Realizing his advantage of surprise was lost, Edgar stepped forward and spoke up. "Yes, I have come to seek revenge for my wife." The elder vampire chuckled. "I feast on so many, it's hard to recall just one meal." Enraged, Edgar shouted, "Meal! She was my wife, and you will suffer for this." The creature, an elder vampire, rose before him, its presence commanding and terrifying. "You seem feeble, weak, but something is odd about you. I guess I'll find out among your corpse." As the elder grew in confidence, several hands reached out from the darkness and grabbed it. Edgar's reanimated corpses, undetected and hidden in the shadows. The elder screamed in fury, "How dare you!" The elder quickly shifted into the shadows, breaking free of the grips. "You will pay for that," it hissed. Edgar replied defiantly, "Stop talking and face me, coward, or are you only brave when facing sleeping women?" Infuriated, the elder lunged at Edgar, knocking him to the ground. Edgar commanded his minions to attack again, but the elder passed through them in shadow form, severing Edgar's connection to them. He was now alone against the elder. The elder stood before him, eyes glowing with malevolence. "What are you, that you can control the dead?" Edgar did not reply. He focused his power, forming a long blood spear that stabbed the elder. The creature winced in pain, but Edgar did not stop. He conjured another spear, then another, weakening the elder. The vampire laughed through the pain. "You cannot kill me with parlor tricks." Edgar's eyes blazed with determination. "I know," he said, and began to manipulate the very blood inside the elder's body. The vampire screamed in agony as Edgar forced the blood out, pulling the elder apart from the inside. Blood sprayed in all directions, and the elder's body disintegrated until nothing remained. Weak but satisfied, Edgar gathered the remains of the elder and rushed back to his lab. His heart pounded with both exhaustion and triumph. He had defeated the unkillable. The road ahead was still fraught with danger, but Edgar was no longer the man he once was. He had become something else, something powerful and terrifying, and he would not rest until every vampire who had destroyed his life had paid with their own. The fall of Edgar Thornwood. In the dim light of his laboratory, Edgar carefully laid the small remains of the elder vampire on the table. The remnants were grotesque, but they held secrets he needed to unlock. He focused his power, reanimating the tissue. Blood bubbled and flesh writhed as he tried to establish a connection, hoping to use this link to track down more of the elders. Each one would pay for what happened to Lily. The blood and tissue moved with a life of their own under his command, an eerie display of his growing power. As he worked, the door to his lab burst open. Dr. Philip Marston, the head of the research team, stormed in, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. "Edgar, what in God's name are you doing?" Marston shouted. "This is madness." Edgar turned slowly, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "I'm doing what needs to be done, Philip." Marston's eyes darted to the writhing flesh on the table. "This is abomination. You've gone too far. You're no longer a scientist. You're a monster. I'm shutting this down. You're fired from the Institute and banned from the service." A dark smile played on Edgar's lips. "You think you can stop me?" He raised his hand towards Marston, who suddenly felt a sickening pull at his very core. Edgar was draining his life essence, the vibrant energy flowing from Marston into Edgar's outstretched hand. Marston's screams echoed through the lab as he collapsed to the floor, his body an empty husk. Edgar looked down at the lifeless body, his expression one of detached satisfaction. He concentrated again, reanimating Marston's corpse. The body twitched and stood, staring blankly ahead. "How satisfying," Edgar murmured. "I get to kill you twice." With a swift motion, he disassembled the animated corpse, reducing it to lifeless pieces once more. The act felt disturbingly gratifying, a clear sign of how far Edgar had strayed from his humanity. He was no longer driven by grief alone. His heart was now a cauldron of hatred and a lust for vengeance. Edgar turned back to his macabre work, his mind set on one goal: to track down and destroy every elder vampire. He now knew how to trace them, using the blood and tissue connections. Each one would end up as a specimen on his laboratory table. He was transforming, stepping closer to becoming a soulless necromancer. His heart was cold, his soul darkened, but he remained unwavering in his mission. Phase 1 of Edgar's transformation was complete. Phase 2 would see him change further, and Phase 3 would connect him to Necros, the god of the undead. Edgar Thornwood's journey of revenge had only just begun. His trail of vengeance would lead him deeper into darkness, and nothing would stand in his way. Each elder he encountered would face his wrath, and the world would come to know the terrifying power of a man who had forsaken his humanity. Coming soon, The Necromancer's Journeys. Part 2. Follow Edgar's relentless pursuit of the elders and witness his further transformation. Only at Professor Shadow. The Necromancer's Vengeance, the fall of Edgar Thornwood. The old house stood at the edge of town, its dilapidated structure cloaked in shadows. This was the lair of a group of vampires, elders who had evaded death for centuries. Tonight, they would face a new kind of threat. Edgar Thornwood, now fully transformed into a necromancer, approached the house. His features had changed drastically. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken and devoid of warmth, giving him an eerie, almost skeletal appearance. Edgar's undead minions, reanimated corpses from the nearby cemetery, surrounded the house. With the silent command, they moved forward, smashing down doors and ripping open coffins. The air was thick with the stench of decay as the dead tore at the elders with relentless fury. Inside, the vampires noticed the disturbance. They slipped into shadow, their dark forms melding with the darkness to strike back. Using their shadow powers, they smashed into the reanimated corpses, severing the connection between Edgar and his minions. One by one, the corpses fell to the ground, lifeless once more. But Edgar was prepared. The undead were merely a distraction. As the vampires focused on his minions, Edgar stood in the center of the chaos, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. He extended his hands, and a dark energy pulsed from him, manipulating the blood and tissue of the elders. The blood began to seep out of their bodies, pooling on the floor as their flesh shriveled and withered. The vampires screamed in agony, their centuries-old lives draining away. One by one they collapsed, their once immortal bodies reduced to lifeless husks. Edgar moved through the house methodically, purging it of the group of elders. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Edgar stood victorious amidst the carnage, his transformation from a man of science to a necromancer complete. His heart no longer held any trace of the grief-stricken husband he once was. He had embraced his new life of death and chaos, fully aware of the darkness that now consumed him. As he surveyed the destruction, a twisted smile played on his lips. He was no longer bound by the limitations of mortality. The power of Necros flowed through him, guiding his every move. He knew that this was only the beginning. The elders who had destroyed his life would continue to fall, one by one, until none remained. Edgar Thornwood, the Necromancer, had fully embraced his dark destiny. His journey of vengeance would continue, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. The world of the undead had a new master, and he would not rest until every last vampire had paid for their sins. Back at his home, Edgar Thornwood sat in the dim light of his study, surrounded by ancient tomes and arcane artifacts. The once warm and inviting house had transformed into a macabre sanctuary of death and necromancy. For months, he had honed his skills, delving deeper into the dark arts with each passing day. Each time he wielded his powers, he felt a piece of himself slipping away. His life essence was being siphoned off as payment to Necros, the Dark Lord he had pledged his service to. Edgar could feel the gradual erosion of his humanity, but he cared little for his own life. His heart was a cold husk, filled only with anger, hate, and an unyielding desire for revenge. The room was silent, except for the occasional rustle of parchment as Edgar turned the pages of a necromantic grimoire. His appearance had deteriorated further. His skin was now almost translucent, veins visible beneath the surface, like a network of dark rivers. His eyes, once filled with curiosity and intellect, were now sunken and hollow, reflecting the abyss of his soul. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the tools of his dark trade. Vials of blood, preserved organs, and the remnants of his previous battles were carefully arranged on shelves. The air was thick with the scent of decay and old magic. This was his life now, a grim and solitary existence devoted to mastering the art of death. Edgar stood and moved to a nearby mirror. He barely recognized the reflection staring back at him. The man he once was, the scientist dedicated to curing diseases, was gone. In his place stood a necromancer, a servant of Necros, whose very essence was being consumed by the dark powers he wielded. His thoughts drifted to Lily, his beloved wife. The pain of her loss was still a raw wound in his heart, fueling his relentless quest for vengeance. He had promised her memory that he would destroy those responsible for her death, and he intended to keep that promise, no matter the cost. Edgar reached out and touched the mirror, his fingers leaving smudges on the glass. "I will not stop," He whispered to himself, "I will not rest until every last one of them is destroyed." His voice echoed softly in the silent room, a vow to himself and to the darkness that now claimed his soul. Each day he grew stronger, but with that strength came an increasing emptiness. He knew that his life was slowly being drained away, but he welcomed it. There was nothing left for him in the world of the living. His existence had become a vessel for vengeance, and he would see it through to the bitter end. As he turned away from the mirror, Edgar felt a familiar presence. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. Necros was watching, always waiting, always hungry for more. Edgar embraced the chill, drawing strength from the Dark Lord's power. With renewed determination, he returned to his work, preparing for the next confrontation. The elders would fall, one by one, until none remained. Edgar Thornwood, the Necromancer, would not be stopped. His heart was empty, his soul a shadow, but his purpose was clear. He would avenge Lily, even if it meant losing himself entirely to the darkness. In the heart of a desolate mansion, hidden from the prying eyes of the world, a powerful elder convened with his council. The elder's name was Thalasar, an ancient being whose very presence exuded an aura of dread. His features were sharp and angular, his eyes cold and calculating, a testament to the centuries he had spent mastering the dark arts. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as the flickering flames of black candles cast an eerie glow. The other elders gathered around a long, ornate table, their expressions grim. They had come to discuss a matter of great urgency, a threat that had been systematically dismantling their kind. Thalasar stood at the head of the table, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "Word of Edgar Thornwood's assaults has reached us. He has become a formidable adversary, one who must be dealt with swiftly and decisively." The elders murmured amongst themselves, their voices tinged with fear and anger. One of them, a gaunt figure named Morgoth, spoke up. "We have found the corpses of our kin, sprawled around the areas where Edgar has struck. He uses the dead somehow, resurrecting them to do his bidding. This is no ordinary human, sire." Thalasar nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I sense the hand of a higher power at play. Necros, perhaps. We must act with caution. While we can easily destroy the undead, this Edgar seems to be something more. He's growing in power if he can take out an entire group of our kin." The room fell silent as Thalasar's words sank in. The gravity of the situation was clear. They were not dealing with a mere mortal, but with a necromancer who had the backing of a dark deity. Thalasar began to pace, his mind working through the possibilities. "We will set a trap for him," Thalasar declared. "We will draw him out and destroy him, but we must be cunning. He is not to be underestimated." Morgoth leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "What do you propose, Thalasar?" Thalasar paused, considering his next words carefully. "We will use his own tactics against him. We will create a situation he cannot resist, something that will draw him in. Once he is ensnared, we will strike with all our might." Another elder, a pale woman named Seraphine, spoke. "But what of his undead? They are formidable, and he controls them with ease." Thalasar's lips curled into a cold smile. "We will lure him to a place where his power is weakest. There, we will confront him and end this once and for all." The elders nodded in agreement, their resolve hardening. They knew that failure was not an option. Thalasar's plan was set into motion, and each elder began to prepare for the confrontation. They would use their vast resources and cunning to set the perfect trap, one that Edgar Thornwood would not be able to escape. Thalassa looked around the room, his eyes meeting those of each elder in turn. Prepare yourselves. We will strike soon. Edgar Thornwood's reign of terror ends with us. The council dispersed, each member retreating to their own dark corner of the world to ready themselves for the coming battle. Thalassa remained, his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew that Edgar was no ordinary foe, but Thalassa had faced countless enemies over the centuries and emerged victorious. This necromancer would be no different. As the night deepened, the mansion grew silent once more. The stage was set, and the trap was laid. Thalassa and his council were ready to bring an end to Edgar Thornwood's dark crusade, or die trying. Edgar Thornwood stood in his dimly lit laboratory, the air thick with the scent of chemicals and decay. For months, he had dedicated himself to a singular purpose, perfecting his latest experiment. It was a diabolical creation, one that combined his necrotic power with his extensive scientific knowledge. He worked tirelessly, his fingers deftly manipulating tools and reagents, his mind focused on the intricate details of his dark craft. Each day brought him closer to his goal. Edgar's anticipation grew with every passing hour, his thoughts consumed by the promise of what his creation could achieve. He envisioned the pain and suffering it would bring to those who had wronged him, to the vampires who had taken Lily from him. His heart, now a vessel of hate and revenge, found a twisted joy in the prospect of their torment. Finally, after countless nights of relentless effort, Edgar stood back from his workbench, a cold smile spreading across his lips. "It is done," he whispered, his voice filled with dark satisfaction. "My latest creation will be my best. Let this be the vengeance that brings them the pain they deserve." He gazed at the hidden form of his creation, the details obscured from view, a mystery to all but him. The very air around it seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, a testament to the power and malice infused within. Edgar knew that this would be his masterpiece, the weapon that would ensure his enemy's destruction. As he turned away, Edgar felt a strange aura brush against his senses. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. Something was watching him. The aura was faint but unmistakable. An elder was nearby. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Good," he muttered. "I will destroy them all." The aura quickly fled, but Edgar's senses were now attuned to the unique signatures of the elders. He could follow its trace, like a predator tracking its prey. He summoned a group of his reanimated corpses, grotesque remnants of his experiments, to follow him. They moved through the night, their decayed forms a testament to his growing power. Edgar moved with purpose, his mind singularly focused on vengeance. The trail led him through dark alleys and deserted streets, each step bringing him closer to his quarry. His reanimated minions followed in eerie silence, their empty eyes reflecting the cold determination of their master. The chase finally led Edgar to an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated barn loomed before him, its wooden structure barely standing. He could feel the presence of the elder within, a dark aura seeping through the walls. Edgar's heart pounded with anticipation. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He stood outside of the barn, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. The air was thick with tension, the silence almost palpable. Edgar knew that within these walls a battle awaited, a battle that would end with the death of the parasite hiding within. He took a deep breath, his mind clear and resolute. "This ends now," he whispered to himself, "for Lily, for everything they took from me." With a final command to his undead minions, Edgar stepped forward, ready to face the elder and bring his vengeance to its inevitable conclusion. Edgar commanded his undead minions to smash down the door and search for the Elder. The barn door splintered under their assault, and the reanimated corpses poured into the darkened interior. But as Edgar stepped inside, he saw Thalassa standing there, unhidden and calm. "The insect is caught in the web," Thalassa sneered. At that moment, elders emerged from all directions, swiftly severing the connections to Edgar's undead minions. One by one, the corpses fell lifeless to the ground. Edgar raised his hands, ready to summon his dark powers, but before he could react, a blow from behind sent him sprawling. Another elder had attacked him from the shadows. "Outnumbered and outmatched," Thalassa declared. The other elders laughed as Edgar lay on the floor, seemingly helpless. One of them, a sneering figure named Malakar, spoke. "This is the one who slaughtered our brethren. For what?" Thalassa stepped closer, his eyes piercing into Edgar's. "Why? Why have you taken this path toward your own destruction?" Edgar looked up, blood trickling from a wound on his head. "One of your kind killed my wife. I will not rest until you are all dead." The elders laughed again, all except Thalassa. "Where did this incident occur?" Thalassa asked, his tone almost curious. Edgar recounted the story of his home and Lily. One of the other elders, a smug vampire named Varath, interrupted. "That house? Oh yes, I remember. That woman. She did taste so good. She squirmed a bit, but soon fell silent after I drained her." Rage filled Edgar's eyes as he looked at Varath. You are the one." Varath smiled, baring his fangs. "I'm afraid so." Edgar's voice was cold and deadly. "Then you shall be the first to die." Thalassa stepped forward. "This is not all, is it? I sense the work of a higher power. Tell me who gave you this power, and we shall make this quick." Edgar smiled grimly. "Oh, this will be far from quick." Suddenly, a massive, hulking monstrosity burst through the side of the barn. This was Edgar's latest creation, a colossal construct of flesh and bone, infused with his own life essence, making it independent of his direct control. The creature roared, its strength unfathomable, and grabbed an elder, snapping him in half like a twig. The elders charged at the creature in shadow form, but they bounced off its thick, reinforced hide. The monstrosity picked them up, one by one, tearing them to pieces with brutal efficiency. Varath, realizing the danger, tried to escape, but found himself unable to move. His very blood was being controlled. He looked back to see Edgar, his hands outstretched. "For Lily," Edgar whispered, and Varath's blood exploded out from his body, leaving nothing but a shredded corpse. The hulking creature continued its rampage unstoppable, slaughtering elder after elder with savage abandon. Thalassa watched, his face a mask of cold fury, as his council was decimated. Finally, only Thalassa remained. "Enough," Edgar commanded, and the monstrous creation halted, its blood-soaked form standing ominously behind him. Edgar stepped forward, his eyes locked on Thalassa. The barn was a scene of carnage, the ground littered with the remains of the elders. Edgar's transformation was complete. He was no longer a man, but a force of dark vengeance, driven by the memory of his lost love and the promise of retribution. He stood ready to confront Thalassa, the architect of his torment, with the full might of his necromantic power. Thalassa stared at Edgar, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and cunning. "You have your vengeance, but yet you are still unsated. Do you not see you have been manipulated? Your puppeteer has taken everything from you, your humanity, your life essence. Soon you will have nothing left." Edgar's face was a mask of cold resolve. "I have already lost everything. What do I care for life? when everything in my life has been taken. There is nothing in this world for me now. I welcome the end." Thalassa nodded slowly. "I see. Necros cares little for you, Edgar. He only cares for his own dominion over others. I, too, lost everything many years ago, and I, too, sold my life for power. You have the power to end me, but you too shall end. Your life force is almost over, and then what?" "Then I will have to pay for this bargain," Edgar replied, his voice steady but hollow. Thalassa's mind raced, seeking a way to survive. "Yes, I know this bargain well. You have power, but each use of it draws you closer to the shambling corpses you brought here, closer to Necros' eternal control. But there is a way to be free of this pact." Edgar looked at Thalassa, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his mask of hatred. "Why would I want that? I have lived as a man, now I live among the dead. I welcome the end." Thalassa's eyes narrowed, his voice softening to a persuasive whisper. "You welcome an eternity as one of those." He pointed to one of the undead creatures, laying lifeless on the floor. "Your soul, never free to live eternity with your lost loved one." Edgar's eyes bore into Thalassa, the question sinking deep into his mind. Thalassa sensed the opening and pressed on. "I know a way to have eternal life energy." Edgar stood silent, his mind churning with thoughts of vengeance and the bitter realization of his fate. The idea of eternal suffering, unable to reunite with Lily, gnawed at him. He looked at Thalassa, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes betrayed a spark of interest. Thalassa smiled slightly, seeing the seeds of doubt and curiosity take root. "Yes, Edgar. Imagine a way to live forever, without the shackles of Necros. To be free, to have the power to ensure that no one else suffers as you have." The barn was silent, the weight of Thalassa's words hanging in the air. Edgar's gaze remained fixed on the elder vampire, questioning his very thoughts of eternal life. Edgar stood still, lost in his thoughts. Doubt began to creep into his mind. The relentless pursuit of vengeance had stripped away his humanity, but now, in the presence of Thalassa's tempting offer, fragments of it seemed to resurface. He yearned for Lily, knowing he could never again be with her, not even in death. The promise of eternal life, without the burden of Necros' control, was a seductive whisper in his mind. As he contemplated Thalassa's words, a fog, cold as the grave, blew into the barn. The air thickened with an icy chill, and the messenger from the old house appeared. "Do not go against the will of our Lord," the messenger intoned, his voice echoing through the barn. Edgar looked up, anger flashing in his eyes. You would deny me ever seeing my love again? Begone!" He commanded his creature to attack the messenger, but before it could move, the messenger disappeared, leaving only the lingering chill. Thalassa saw his opportunity. "Are you ready to live forever, Edgar?" Edgar, still seething with rage and despair, looked at Thalassa. "Yes," he declared, his voice filled with determination. Thalassa smiled, thinking he had struck a bargain that would save his life. "Then let us make this pact, and you shall be free of Necros' grasp." But Edgar's eyes hardened, a steely resolve replacing his doubt, but not by becoming the very thing I detest, the very thing that killed my Lily. Before Thalassa could react, Edgar commanded his creature to destroy the elder vampire. The hulking monstrosity moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Thalassa and crushing him in its powerful grip. Thalassa's screams echoed through the barn as the creature tore him apart, piece by piece. From outside the barn, in the darkness of the night, the screams of Thalassa could be heard, a chilling testament to Edgar's relentless pursuit of vengeance. The barn fell silent once more, the fog dissipating into the cold night air. Edgar stood alone, the remnants of his humanity slipping away once more. He had rejected the offer of eternal life from the vampire, choosing instead to remain true to his purpose, even if it meant embracing the darkness that Necros had cast over him. His creature stood beside him, its monstrous form a symbol of his unwavering resolve. Edgar knew that his journey was far from over. The path ahead was still shrouded in shadows, but he would walk it with the same unyielding determination that had brought him this far. Rebirth of vengeance. Back at Edgar's home, the air was thick with the scent of chemicals and the stench of decay. Edgar, his body frail and his eyes sunken, worked feverishly on his final experiment. The blood of the elder Thalassar was the key, treated as nothing more than a disease, a field Edgar had once mastered with ease. He felt his life slipping away, each breath a laborious effort, but his will to complete his task kept him going. Using his knowledge of diseases, Edgar experimented with various strains of deadly pathogens like the Black Death. He combined them with the vampire blood, manipulating the essence of life and death. His hand shook as he mixed the substances, each moment bringing him closer to the brink of collapse. As he toiled, Edgar could feel the call of Necros, the dark god coming to claim his due. The power that had sustained him was nearly spent. Desperation drove him forward. He smashed the glass tube containing his latest strain of disease and pressed his hand onto the shards, letting the mixture seep into his bloodstream. His body went limp, his life force almost entirely extinguished. But then, something miraculous began to happen. The cells of the disease merged with his own, the eternal life of the vampire blood melding with the deadly pathogen. The mix of the two reignited Edgar's essence, transforming him into something entirely new. Edgar's eyes snapped open, glowing with an unholy light. He was no longer living, nor was he dead. He was a constant state of rejuvenation, the disease eating away at him, only to be regenerated by the vampire's immortality. His flesh repaired itself, even as it decayed, a perpetual cycle of life and death. He pulled himself to his feet, feeling the newfound power surging through his veins. His mind, once clouded by vengeance and grief, was now clear and focused. He screamed into the night sky, a declaration of his rebirth. I was but a man, then a necromancer. Now I am reborn again, alive but dead. I will seek my revenge on you, Necros. I will seek you out and destroy you. A huge thunderclap erupted from the sky, the sound reverberating through the night, as if a god had been angered. The heavens seemed to tremble at Edgar's defiance, a portent of the battle to come. Edgar Thornwood, now a being of living death, stood ready to challenge the dark god who had manipulated him. His transformation was complete, his purpose unwavering. He was no longer bound by the limitations of mortality, nor the constraints of necromancy. He was something the world had never seen before, a harbinger of vengeance, a scourge upon the darkness. With the storm raging overhead, Edgar set out into the night, his mind singularly focused on his new goal. Necros would pay for the suffering he had caused. Edgar's journey was far from over. It had merely entered a new, darker phase. The world would soon know the wrath of a man reborn through death and disease, a force that even the gods would come to fear. path to Necros. Edgar Thornwood, now completely unrecognizable, had spent months buried in ancient texts, studying the myths surrounding Necros, the god of the undead. His skeletal face, a grotesque mask of decaying and regenerating tissue, bore a perpetual grimace. Edgar was no longer a man. He had become something new, something terrifying, a creature in a constant state of death and rebirth. His face, covered in new tissue, was quickly consumed by an enhanced version of the Black Death, a testament to his horrific transformation. His powers of necromancy had grown exponentially, merging his scientific knowledge with the cursed arts he had mastered. Edgar's skeletal frame was wrapped in tattered robes, and his eyes glowed with an unholy light. He was driven by a singular purpose: to find and destroy Necros, the dark god who had manipulated his fate and taken everything from him. Today, a rare smile played on his decayed lips. He had finally discovered the very thing he had been searching for, a way to confront Necros. His research had led him to the ancient ruins of what was once a shrine to the god of the undead, a place rumoured to possess the power to open a gateway to Necros' realm. Edgar prepared for his journey to this forbidden site, the ruins abandoned for centuries. He knew the journey would be perilous, but his determination was unwavering. He gathered his monstrous creations, grotesque beings of flesh and bone, animated by his dark powers, and set out to cross the seas to reach his destination, a small, desolate island in the Mediterranean Sea. Stealing a boat from a secluded harbour, Edgar and his creatures boarded, their presence sending shivers through the small coastal town. The voyage was eerie, the sea seeming to part before them as if fearing the abominations on board. Edgar stood at the helm, his skeletal hands gripping the wheel, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His creations moved silently, their twisted forms a testament to his mastery of necromancy. The journey was long and arduous, the boat cutting through the waves under a sky perpetually shrouded in clouds. Edgar's mind was focused, replaying the steps he would take to confront Necros. He had learned of the rituals and incantations required to open the gateway, each one etched into his memory with painstaking precision. Days turned into nights, and finally, the island appeared on the horizon. It was a barren, rocky place, its shores lined with jagged cliffs and dark, foreboding forests. Edgar felt a surge of anticipation as they approached, the air growing colder, the sky darker. As the boat touched the shore, Edgar stepped onto the island, his creations following in eerie silence. The ground beneath his feet felt charged with dark energy, the very essence of the place, resonating with the power of Necros. Edgar looked around, his skeletal face set in grim determination. "Necros," he whispered to the wind, "your reign of terror is about to end." He knew that the ruins lay somewhere within the dark forest that loomed before him. Gathering his strength and commanding his creatures to follow, Edgar Thornwood set out to find the ancient shrine, ready to confront the god of the undead and exact his vengeance. An unexpected ally. Edgar Thornwood moved inland, the dark forest closing in around him as he made his way toward the ruins of the forgotten temple of Necros. His skeletal frame, carved in decaying and regenerating tissue, was flanked by his monstrous creations, ready to defend their master at a moment's notice. As they approached a clearing, Edgar noticed a strange figure sitting on a rock. The aura emanating from the figure was unmistakably vampiric, yet there was something else, something far more powerful. Edgar raised his hand, signaling his creatures to prepare for an attack. The approach was tense, each step filled with the anticipation of violence. As they neared, the figure spoke. "Hello, Edgar. No need for a fight. I am a friend. I am here to aid you in your battle against Necros. You see, my father would love for you to destroy him, if that's even possible." Edgar's voice was cold and distrustful. "I do not make deals with your kind. I destroy them." The strange man chuckled softly. Come, Edgar. Surely you can see I am far beyond any elder you have encountered. Yes, I have their traits, but look beyond that. I am a friend. I detest Necros as much, if not more, than you." Edgar's eyes narrowed. "Who are you, and how can you help me?" "My name is Thorn, Dr. Thorn," the man replied with a sly smile. "You see, we even share something in our last name. Now surely this is not just coincidence." Edgar began to lower his guard, intrigued but still cautious. "What is it you want, Dr. Thorn?" Dr. Thorn stood up from the rock, his movements graceful and deliberate. "My father, whom I also hate, would truly love for Necros to fall. And while I would like nothing more than my own father to fall, I feel with Necros out of the game, the balance would be off, and I could finally challenge my father for dominance. But that really has nothing to do with you. Let me show you how I can help you." Dr. Thorn continued. "You cannot simply open the door to Necros' land. This isn't some comic book. You'll need a key." Edgar's curiosity was piqued. "What sort of key?" Dr. Thorn smiled, holding up a strange bone structure. "This key, it's a piece of Necros himself, thought lost many years ago in the great battle of the gods." Edgar's eyes widened with interest. "Then how did you get it? Are you a god?" Dr. Thorn laughed. "Who, me? No, I am just misunderstood." Edgar's skepticism returned. "So what am I going to have to do to get this key?" Dr. Thorn's smile widened. "Nothing. Here, it is yours, a gift from me. I cannot aid you once you enter his domain, so I wish you well, Edgar. I do hope to see you again, but I honestly don't hold much hope for you. Necros is powerful, too powerful, but if you can weaken him in some way, it will be truly appreciated." Edgar took the key, the strange bone structure cold and ancient in his hand. He studied Dr. Thorn for a moment, searching for any signs of deceit, but found none. This unexpected ally had given him the means to confront Necros, and while Edgar knew the dangers that lay ahead, his resolve was unshaken. "Thank you," Edgar said, his voice a mix of gratitude and determination. "I will do what must be done." Dr. Thorn nodded, stepping back into the shadows. "Good luck, Edgar Thornwood. May your vengeance be swift and your strength unyielding." With the key in his possession, Edgar turned back to the path leading deeper into the island. His mind was set, and his purpose clear. The confrontation with Necros was inevitable, and Edgar was ready to face the Dark God with all the power he had amassed. As he stepped forward, his monstrous creations followed, and the island seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the battle to come. The gateway to Necros. After some time of travelling, Edgar Thornwood finally arrived at the site, a desolate expanse of old ruins and crumbling structures that looked more like a tomb and grave than a temple. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was only broken by the occasional whisper of the wind. Edgar wandered through the ruins, searching for an entrance or a place to use the key. But there was nothing but rubble and ruin, no doorways or discernible structures, just the remnants of a once great edifice now lost to time. Frustration began to gnaw at him as he meticulously examined the strange key once more, feeling the powerful aura emanating from it. Determined, Edgar placed the key on an old stone and began to channel his necromantic power into it. He sent his own life energy into the strange key, feeling it respond to his will. It began to glow with an eerie light, and then it grew. the bones stretching and twisting, creating a strange and ominous doorway. As the doorway took shape, Edgar realized why Dr. Thorn had not used it himself. Only a necromancer could reanimate it, using the essence of life and death to activate its hidden power. The doorway now stood before Edgar, a swirling vortex of death and decay, leading directly into Necros' domain. Edgar knew this journey was one from which he would not return. He took a moment to look around, his eyes tracing the outlines of the ruins, the dark sky above, and the world he was about to leave behind. He thought of Lily, the love he had lost and the driving force behind his quest. Raising his voice to the stars, he whispered, "For you, Lily." With resolve, Edgar stepped forward into the swirling vortex, his monstrous creations following obediently. The vortex pulsed with dark energy, engulfing them in its deadly embrace. As Edgar crossed the threshold, the world behind him faded into oblivion, and the cold, oppressive atmosphere of Necros' domain consumed him. The sea of death. Stepping into the realm of Necros, Edgar Thornwood was confronted by a desolate landscape. Before him stood a colossal structure made entirely of bone, its grotesque architecture towering ominously against the dark, empty sky. The land around him was a wasteland of death and decay, devoid of life, stretching into infinity. Edgar moved toward the strange bone structure, each step echoing in the eerie silence. As he neared, the ground beneath him began to tremble. From the earth rose the undead, hundreds, then thousands, creating a sea of death that surged toward him. The air was filled with the stench of rot and the sound of clattering bones. "Attack!" Edgar commanded his monstrous creations, and they charged into the mass of undead with fierce determination. Though formidable, they were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer numbers. The sea of death and decay swallowed them, their forms disappearing beneath the relentless tide of skeletal and decayed bodies. Edgar stood alone, the wall of death moving inexorably towards him. He raised his hand and spoke with authority. "You are undead. You will do the bidding of Edgar Thornwood." Channeling his necromantic power, Edgar began to take control of the undead creatures. The first line of the undead turned and started attacking their kin, and as Edgar's influence spread, more and more fell under his command. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The undead parted, creating a walkway towards the bone structure. Edgar moved quickly, his eyes fixed on the entrance ahead. As he reached the massive doors, he glanced back at the unfathomable sight. Undead creatures stretching as far as the eye could see, with a front line under his control, holding back the wave of death. With a final push, Edgar stepped through the entrance and shut the heavy bone doors behind him. The sound of the door closing echoed through the structure, a brief respite from the horrors outside. He had passed the first challenge, but he knew the worst was yet to come. As he stood in the dim light of the bone structure, Edgar contemplated the trials that lay ahead. The path to Necros would be fraught with danger, and he could not afford to underestimate the Dark God's power. His resolve hardened. Edgar prepared himself for whatever awaited him in the depths of Necros' domain, the Hall of Reflections. As Edgar moved through the strange corridors, made of bone and decaying flesh, the air grew colder and more oppressive. Each step echoed through the labyrinthine passages, the sound mingling with the whispers of the dead. Up ahead, a familiar figure appeared, the messenger from the old house. The messenger spoke. "Edgar, stop. Go no further. I do not know how you have entered the realm of our Lord, but you must not confront him. You are but a man. You must stop this insanity and give in to the power of our Lord Necros." Edgar replied, his voice unwavering. "Your lord, not mine. I am no longer Edgar Thornwood. He died many months ago. Now I am neither dead nor alive. I walk between death and constant rebirth. I cannot die, and I will lock Necros in an eternal battle until his strength fades, as mine will not." The messenger's voice trembled with urgency. "Necros is not simply a being you can do battle with. He is the embodiment of living death. He will smite you with but a thought, Edgar." Edgar stepped forward, his gaze steely. "He will try. Now out of my way. I hunger for battle." Edgar moved past the messenger, leaving him confused and conflicted. As he ventured deeper into the structure, the air grew thicker with the scent of decay. He entered a large chamber, its walls adorned with ancient runes and bones. Standing in the shadows were two figures, their presence both familiar and unsettling. He approached, ready for battle, but stopped in his tracks when he recognized them. The first figure was himself, a man before the transformation. The second figure was the Necromancer, Edgar Thornwood, a twisted reflection of what he had become. The man Edgar spoke first, his voice filled with sorrow. "Edgar, stop what you are doing. This is not who we are. We were kind and caring. We had a wonderful life. It's time to end it all and join Lily in death." The Necromancer Edgar then spoke, his voice dripping with malice. "Necros gave you your power. How do you plan to defeat him? You are but an insect to him. Stop this madness. You have no chance. You cannot win." Edgar, in his current form, clenched his fists and spoke with fierce determination. "Yes, I can give up. I can look forward and see no chance at all for success or victory. I can compare myself to the opponent and feel inferior, weak, and useless in awe of their power. I can look at myself with no chance, no hope, and do what I have done my whole life. Put others before me, think others are better, stronger, think I have been given the short straw somehow, and should leave the tough fight for others who are more worthy than me. I could, but I will not." He took a step forward, his voice rising. "I have lived that life. Today I am reborn, and even if I fail, I will so enjoy the fact that I had the guts to make a stand against the impossible. Now get out of my way." With that, the two figures dissolved into dust, their voices fading into the darkness. Edgar moved forward, his resolve unshaken, his eyes set on the path ahead. He could feel the presence of Necros growing stronger, the air heavy with the weight of the Dark God's power. Edgar knew the final confrontation was near, and he steeled himself for the battle that would determine not only his fate, but the balance of power in the realm of the undead. The final threshold. Edgar could feel himself drawing closer to Necros. The air grew heavier with every step, charged with an overwhelming energy that seemed to pulse from up ahead. The power of the Dark God was palpable, a force that made the very bones of the structure tremble. Suddenly, a voice pierced the oppressive silence, a voice that did not belong in this realm. "Uncle, you must stop. You must not face Necros. Necros must exist to sustain the balance." Edgar turned sharply, his eyes widening in recognition. Before him stood Stephen Lestat, the son of his sister, but no longer the baby he remembered. The boy was now about 5 years old, his innocent eyes filled with a wisdom and sorrow that belied his age. "Stephen," Edgar whispered, his voice a mix of confusion and concern, "what are you doing here?" Stephen looked up at him, his small face solemn. "I am forever connected to Necros. You connected me. The day you touched my head, you condemned me to walk with Necros." Edgar's face twisted in anguish. "How? I do not understand." "He said he has big plans for me, and I must follow in your footsteps, uncle," Stephen replied, his voice steady. Edgar's anger flared, his eyes blazing with fury. Leave him alone, Necros. He has nothing to do with this. Stephen's expression remained calm, almost resigned. Uncle, you must not face Necros. You will die. Edgar's voice softened, filled with a sorrowful determination. I'm already dead, Stephen. Sometimes we have to make a stand, for if not us, then who? Stephen's form began to dissolve into dust, his small hand reaching out as if to touch Edgar one last time. Goodbye, Uncle. As Stephen disappeared, Edgar turned to face what was surely the entrance to Necros' throne room. The massive doors loomed before him, carved from ancient bone and pulsing with a dark energy. He could feel the presence of the dark god just beyond, a force so immense that it seemed to warp reality itself. Edgar steeled himself, his mind focused and his resolve unbreakable. He had come too far to turn back now. The echoes of his loved ones' voices and the weight of his own transformation fueled his determination. He would confront Necros no matter the cost. With a final deep breath, Edgar pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the unknown. The throne of Necros. As the heavy doors flew open, Edgar stepped into a vast throne room, worthy of Necros, the god of the undead. The room was cavernous, its high ceiling lost in shadows. Massive pillars, carved from ancient bones, supported the structure, and the walls were adorned with intricate, macabre frescoes, depicting scenes of death and resurrection. The floor was a mosaic of blackened tiles, and a cold, eerie light emanated from the walls, casting long, flickering shadows. In the center of the room stood a throne made of twisted bones and skulls, radiating an aura of dark power. Edgar was in awe as he looked around, half expecting a powerful, monstrous figure to descend upon him at any moment. "Hello, Edgar." A calm voice echoed through the chamber. Edgar turned to see a man standing near the throne, nothing strange or out of the ordinary, just a regular, middle-aged man. "Come in," the voice said. "You are welcome here. I am Necros." Edgar was confused. "Then prepare to fight," he demanded, readying himself. "Oh no, we won't have any of that," Necros replied with a gentle smile. "I am proud of you, my son. You have done things no one else has. You even brought me a gift in this new living death, which I do truly appreciate." Edgar's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" "You see, Edgar, I am always portrayed as this evil death god," Necros said, transforming before Edgar's eyes. His form grew, his body becoming a skeletal giant wreathed in fire, his height reaching the towering ceiling. Then he reverted back to his unassuming human form. "But I must admit, I grow bored with it. For centuries, I have had to put up with this. Death, as you know, is not a being or a god. It just is. I, on the other hand, could be seen as living death. I conquered death, and my followers survive after death has failed, which makes me more powerful than death itself." Edgar listened, trying to understand. Necros continued, "And herein lies the problem, Edgar. I am all-powerful. I could have stopped you at any time in your journey, but I liked your courage and defiance. Many would have given up in the face of certain defeat, but you thrived in it. You even got that snake of a creature, Thorn, to help you. I can't wait to see what happens when his daddy finds out how he delivered you to me. He's going to be so angry." "But you denied me my Lily," Edgar retorted, "wanting me to serve you for an eternity, forever without her." Necros sighed. "Did you listen to a word I said? I am Necros, god of undeath, more powerful than death itself. You want Lily?" Necros waved his hand, and Lily appeared in the room, looking confused. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw Edgar's decayed appearance, and she cowered back in disgust. Necros waved his hand again, and Edgar's form shifted back to that of the man he once was. "There," Necros said. Lily ran to Edgar, tears streaming down her face. "I missed you, Edgar," she said, clinging to him. Edgar held her, his mind racing. "Is this real, or some kind of trick?" And Necros spoke with a hint of amusement. "The power of undeath is the ultimate power. Not even death can defeat us." As Edgar stood there, holding Lily in his arms, he contemplated his next steps. The reality of Necros' power and the implications of his own journey began to sink in. The ultimate power was within his grasp, but at what cost? The future was uncertain, and the choices he made now would determine the fate of his soul and the world of the living and the dead. The realm of undeath. As Edgar began to realize that this was indeed Lily, he felt his tense muscles relax. He held her close, the warmth of her presence soothing his tormented soul. Necros watched them with a satisfied smile and spoke. "What other power could do this? I have given you power. I have given you courage. And now I give you back the one thing all others took from you. I did not take her from you. It was those eternal living elders. Oh, how I hate them. And Nocturna, their god. He's the worst." Edgar's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Necros continued. "Do you know what is the most annoying thing for us, for undeath? It's those who live forever. They skip death, so they skip the chance to be one of us. But you, Edgar, you managed to kill them and use their power to create something completely new. You shall be high in my command when the war of the gods once again resumes. You shall hold an ace in this war." Necros gestured, and two gigantic doors behind him slowly creaked open, revealing a vast and eerie realm. It was the realm of undeath, where those saved from death by Necros lived in wait until he needed them. The landscape was a twisted reflection of life, with ghostly trees and shadowy figures moving silently in the distance. "For now, you may live here with us, the undead, until such a time," Necros said. "Go, Edgar and Lily. Live free in my realm. Live happy. One day, we will have need of your gifts." Edgar and Lily walked towards the open doors, hand in hand. As they stepped into the realm of undeath, the massive doors began to close behind them. Edgar looked back one last time, seeing Necros standing there, watching them with an inscrutable expression. As the doors shut, Necros transformed from his simple image of a man into his true form, a colossal skeletal god of undeath. He sat on his throne, a sinister smile spreading across his bony face. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light as he called into the void. "Nocturna Lasano, continue to build your forces, for nothing can defeat undeath, and now, with the power of living death, you shall fall." The words echoed through the vast emptiness of the realm, a dark promise of the war to come. Necros' laughter filled the throne room, a chilling sound that seemed to make the very bones of the structure tremble. Edgar and Lily found themselves in a place unlike any they had ever known. It was both beautiful and haunting, a testament to Necros' power. As they began their new life in the realm of undeath, Edgar couldn't help but wonder what the future held. He had gained so much and yet lost even more, but for now he had Lily by his side, and that was enough. The legacy of Edgar Thornwood. Edgar's sister mourned the loss of her brother deeply. He had disappeared many months ago, and the townsfolk whispered that he could not bear to live without Lily, and had ended it all. Yet no body was ever found. In time, Edgar's home and estate were inherited by his sister and her son, Stephen Lestat. Years passed, and Stephen grew into a curious and adventurous young man. The old house was filled with secrets, and one day, while exploring its many rooms, he stumbled upon a locked door. This door led to the hidden laboratory where Edgar had conducted his dark experiments. Intrigued, Stephen managed to unlock the door and slipped inside. The room was filled with ancient tomes, strange apparatuses, and notebooks filled with Edgar's meticulous notes on necromancy and the supernatural. Stephen's eyes widened with wonder and fascination as he pored over the writings, trying to make sense of the dark knowledge contained within. He felt a strange connection to his uncle, a pull towards the arcane and the forbidden. Unbeknownst to Stephen, he was not alone. In the shadows, a figure watched his every move. Necros, in his human guise, observed the young man with a sinister smile. He had big plans for Stephen Lestat. The boy's destiny was intertwined with his own, and the knowledge Edgar had left behind was the key to unlocking Stephen's potential. Necros' eyes glowed with anticipation as he whispered to himself, "Yes, young Stephen. Explore, learn and grow. Your journey is only beginning, and I have grand designs for you. You will be my instrument, my champion in the war to come." As Stephen delved deeper into Edgar's notes, the weight of his uncle's legacy began to settle on his shoulders. The mysteries of necromancy and the battle against the forces of the undead beckoned to him, promising power and knowledge beyond his wildest dreams. Little did he know, his path was being carefully guided by the dark god himself. In the quiet of the old house, Stephen Lestat's future was being shaped by the shadows. The end of Edgar Thornwood's tale was only the beginning of another, a story of legacy, dark power, and the eternal struggle between life, death, and the forces that sought to control them both. The end.